The ice in Leo Carter's glass clinked softly against the crystal, a subtle counterpoint to the jazzy melody drifting from the grand piano in the corner. It was a sound he usually savored, a symphony of success in the aftermath of a meticulously orchestrated con, but tonight, the taste of victory was laced with a bitter tang of unease. He couldn't shake off the feeling, a prickling at the back of his neck that whispered of eyes watching, of a game far more intricate than he had initially perceived. The plush velvet of the booth seemed to press in on him, the air thick with the perfume of affluence and the underlying current of hidden agendas. Each clinking glass, every muffled laugh, grated on his nerves. His gaze swept across the upscale lounge, taking in the elegantly dressed patrons, their facades of wealth and sophistication masking the raw ambition and greed that simmered beneath the surface. He knew their kind well, had built his career on exploiting the vulnerabilities of those blinded by their own desires. Leo took a slow sip of his drink, the burn of the aged scotch doing little to quell the growing disquiet within him. He was a master of his craft, a maestro of manipulation, but tonight, he felt like a puppet, his strings being pulled by an unseen hand. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He needed to leave, to disappear into the anonymity of the city, but a strange compulsion held him captive. "Fancy seeing you here, Leo." The voice, husky and tinged with a familiar sardonic amusement, cut through the fog of his thoughts. Leo's head snapped up, his gaze meeting the cool, appraising eyes of Nina Diaz. She stood before him, a vision in emerald silk, her lips curved in a knowing smile that sent a jolt of something unsettling through him. Nina, the ghost he thought he'd left behind, a specter from a past he'd rather forget. "Nina," he acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She slid into the booth opposite him, her movements fluid and graceful, betraying nothing of the tension that crackled between them. "Just passing through," she said, her eyes sharp as shattered glass scanning their surroundings. "Though I must say I'm surprised to see you here, Leo. Celebrating, are we?" "A toast to success," he replied, raising his glass in a mock salute. The clink of crystal against his teeth echoed the unease gnawing at his insides. "Success can be a fickle mistress, Leo," Nina murmured, her gaze locking onto his, "especially in our line of work." Her words, laced with a veiled warning, sent a fresh wave of apprehension through him. He had always known better than to ignore Nina's instincts. She had a knack for sniffing out trouble, a sixth sense that had saved his skin more times than he cared to admit, and right now, her presence screamed of danger. "What are you talking about, Nina?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. Nina leaned back against the plush velvet, her expression unreadable. "Let's just say," she began, her voice barely a whisper above the ambient hum of the lounge, "that you've attracted some unwanted attention, Leo, the kind that doesn't take kindly to being outsmarted." "I don't know what you're implying," he countered, but even to his own ears his words sounded hollow, unconvincing. "Don't play coy with me, Leo," Nina said, her tone sharpening. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The Syndicate. They know about the job, about your little masterpiece." A cold dread washed over him. The Syndicate. The name alone was enough to send shivers down the spines of even the most hardened criminals. They were a force of nature, ruthless and all-consuming, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. To be on their radar was to invite a storm you couldn't weather. "Someone's talking," he said, his voice tight with apprehension. His mind raced, sifting through the faces of his crew, searching for any hint of betrayal. He prided himself on his meticulous planning, his ability to select only the most trustworthy individuals. But the Syndicate had a way of getting to people, of exploiting their weaknesses, turning them into pawns in their deadly game. "They always talk, Leo," Nina said, her gaze fixed on the entrance of the lounge. "It's just a matter of finding out who and how much they've spilled." He followed her gaze, his heart sinking as he spotted the two figures entering the lounge. They moved with a predatory grace, their faces obscured by the shadows, but their intent was clear. Syndicate enforcers. He had seen their kind before, their eyes cold and calculating, their methods brutal and efficient. "We need to go," he hissed, his senses on high alert. The enforcers were closing in, their movements measured, their gaze sweeping the room like predators stalking their prey. Nina nodded, her eyes mirroring his urgency. "This way," she said, rising from the booth and leading him through a labyrinth of corridors, away from the prying eyes of the lounge patrons and the looming threat of the Syndicate's enforcers. They moved swiftly through the dimly lit hallways, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. Leo felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins, sharpening his senses, pushing him forward. He had always been quick on his feet, but tonight the stakes were higher, the consequences of failure more dire than he cared to contemplate. "How did they find me?" he asked, his breath ragged as they navigated a back staircase, their footsteps echoing in the silence. "They always find you, Leo," Nina replied, her voice laced with a hint of exasperation. "You can't outrun the Syndicate. They have eyes and ears everywhere. Someone, somewhere, tipped them off." Her words struck him like a physical blow. Betrayal. It cut deeper than any weapon, the realization that someone he trusted, someone who had shared in his success, had sold him out to the wolves. But who? The question gnawed at him, fueling his desperation, his need to escape the tightening noose of the Syndicate's reach. They finally emerged into the cool night air, the city lights blurring into a dizzying kaleidoscope. Leo drew in a deep breath, the taste of freedom bittersweet on his tongue. He knew this was just the beginning, the opening act in a deadly game of cat and mouse.